It's time for SC250 Tuesday, bringing you information about Chesterfield County, the PD region, and South Carolina's role in the American Revolution. Our guests today are Mr. Will Reid, 106 years old, and a retired African-American business person in Cheraw, and Dr. Carolyn Addison, a retired educator and the first teacher of African-American studies in Chesterfield County. Our guest today is retired businessman, Mr. Will Reid. Welcome, Mr. Reid. Mr. Reid, you were in business a long time. You were 106 years old.
Yeah. Yes.
What type of information were you told growing up about the American Revolution?
Very little. Very little. What I knew about it, what I learned about it, I learned it in high school, but it was very little at that time.
The classes and the textbooks didn't talk a lot about African American.
No. The textbooks that we had was about Baby Reid. There was stories about Baby Reid had a little dog, or Baby Reid had a little cat. Those were the stories that we had to learn how to read and spell. But they did not talk about the American Revolution from a black perspective. No. Tell me about stories that your parents and grandparents shared with you. No.
So it was basically a void.
Yeah.
Wow. Nothing. Miss Addison, tell us about your stories.
Hello, and thank you so much for this stimulating invitation. You know, my mind automatically revisited the mid-1970s when you asked me to reflect on the American Revolution from a Black perspective. Well, during the mid-70s and during the bicentennial, I was teaching English at Cheraw High School. During this time, I was also given an opportunity to instruct an experimental class called Black History. This was a first for the high school and a first for the district. I found out later, after I left, the now Honorable Gail Ingram taught African American history and expanded it to significant heights. Keep in mind, we only had that one semester to pack loads of pertinent information on African Americans to 25 students. And I can recall now the eager students who were required to purchase a book for this class called Black Voices. That was my primary teaching tool. However, we incorporated many, many more names and resources highlighting African Americans who contributed to this country. And I want to be specific regarding the Revolutionary War's dates. April 19th, 1775 through September 3rd, 1783. Now let's see. I believe I'll begin with some of the African American literary figures whom we discussed during that time frame. There were people like Jupiter Hammond, Benjamin Banneker, and Phyllis Wheatley. Hammond, a slave, was instrumental in writing poetry and eventually made a public address to the African Americans in a portion of New York State to stress the importance of education and freedom. Then there was Benjamin Banneker, a free African American mathematician and astronomer who wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson about how hypocritical slavery was, while promoting Christianity and human rights. Phyllis Wheatley, perhaps the most well-known of this group, well, she's recognized as the first African American and the second woman in the United States to publish a book of poetry. Some of you may have purchased some stamps portraying her efforts. Now, even though she was a slave, Phyllis Wheatley, well, we don't know her given name because she came from West Africa, but this is the name her owners gave her, the Wheatleys. She was given the opportunity to be educated. This was extremely rare because slaves were not allowed to learn to read and write. Only a small percentage of slaves were literate. Keep in mind, this was 250 years ago. And during that time, African Americans and other brown people were dehumanized. Phyllis was a very quick learner, and her owner's wife taught her how to read the Bible. She taught her Greek and Latin and so much more. As a result, she eventually published a book of poems that addressed her enslavement and her desire to be free, with revolutionary ideals as a theme. Now, if you get the opportunity, please look her up and read some of her poetry. One in particular was called On Messrs. Hussey and Coffin. inspired while she was tending the dining table as a house slave and overheard dinner guests talking about Mrs. Hussey and Coffin's near-death experience during a storm. She was only about 14 years old. Now, this poem, using the wind gods to frame the storm, and she immediately turns to Christianity and divine providence. Now, she questioned whether being afraid would overwhelm the God and that souls ultimately get their rest in heaven. Was it ironic that Christianity allowed them to treat slaves the way they did? Phyllis even wrote a poem to General George Washington about freedom and questioned slavery during the American Revolution. She wrote about 145 poems altogether, but so many were lost and only about 56 are in circulation today. Oh, by the way, Phyllis was eventually freed. That was because of her literary success, the pressure from some English abolitionists, and the good graces of her owners, the Wheatley. I just had to tell you about this brilliant young lady. I relish her life and her writing because that's a portion of my love for literature. Now, I need to get to the actual combative segment of the African Americans during this war. Believe it or not, overall, there were between 25,000 African American men who fought in this revolution, and they fought on both sides. The Patriots, that's the state side, and the British, and most of them joined the British forces. There were free black men, and some were still enslaved with a promise for freedom in exchange for their efforts. Their support staff duties included militia, sailors, gunners, even pilots, carpenters, infantry, buglers, drummers, cooks, spies, and other missions. And even though unheard of, African Americans and whites fought together side by side. And with this in mind, I can't go any further without talking about one hero most people know about, and that name is Crispus Attucks. He was the one who started it off, in a sense. He was born in Massachusetts as a slave. He escaped and was on the run for about 20 years as a free man. He changed his name. I believe his alias was Michael Johnson, and he served as a sailor. He was on the run for about 20 years. Now, we remember Crispus Attucks as the first person who was killed in the Boston Massacre, and as a result, the first person to die in the American Revolution, making him a symbol as a martyr in the colonists' struggle against the British control. What a serious clash this was between the American colonists and the British. What Crispus Attucks did, taking 2 bullets in the chest, is a reminder that the African American heritage is a part of America's beginning. So every year on March 5th in Boston, there is Crispus Attucks Day, commemorating the anniversary of the Boston Massacre of 1770. Now, there was one particular unit that was almost all black called the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. A Rhode Island assembly in 1778 called for every able-bodied Negro, mulatto, mixed race, or Indian manslave in this state of Rhode Island to enlist into either of the Continental battalions being raised. And as I mentioned earlier, the slaves were promised to immediately be discharged from the service of his master or his mistress. In other words, to be set free. Of course, there was some opposition. Even so, in this regiment, there were 225 fighting men, and 140 of them were black, and they served together until the end of the war. Now, South Carolina was heavily involved in this war. So let me just wrap this up by highlighting a few of our own unsung heroes right here on this state's soil. These are the ones mostly who are not printed on the pages of our South Carolina history books. I mean, I did check. Yet, they fought and left lasting imprints of courage, commitment on both sides, the Patriots and the British forces. They exhibited service above self. That's a term that the Rotary International uses as its motto. Well, the first person was Oscar Marion, who served alongside the Swamp Fox, General Francis Marion, and was highly recognized as a fearless patriot. Then we had Thomas Kearny. He was born a free man in Maryland, and he fought there in Maryland and later came to South Carolina at the battles of Camden. Now, you know they took a serious hit there, and the Utah Springs. He was quick, and he attained the rank of corporal. That's highly unusual. He rescued his major, Perry Benson, at the siege of 96 by carrying the major off the field. This was, by the way, the longest siege in the whole war. Gideon Gibson was not a slave. He came to South Carolina from Boston. He was wealthy. He was a landowner. He was a trader, a carpenter who used his wits to oppose corrupt officials and British taxation. He also married outside his race. Collins. We don't know if this was a first name or a last name. We just know Collins. He was a 14-year-old lad who was a musician in the war. He played the bugle throughout the Battle of Cowpens. You know, that's up in Spartanburg County. Collins was also an aide to Officer Colonel William Washington. He actually saved Washington's life by firing a shot at a British soldier. During this combat at the Cowpens site, 16 black men fought and helped defeat the British. Several names are documented there, but not Collins. I guess you could call him a child of mystery. Next, we'll look at Jim Capers, who was another musician, a drummer in the Continental Army. Although a slave when he enlisted, he received federal pension for his service, and this was also highly unusual. Drummers were very important for communication and morale during the war. Drury Harris also fought in the Battle of Cowpens with Collins. He fought at the Siege of Charleston, and you know, those of you who know your history, you know that was a major disaster for the Patriots. And he also fought at Utah Springs. He was wounded at the Battle of Savannah, trying to climb over a British fortress. Drury Harris was very, very courageous and determined, as were all of the African Americans who took an active part in the American Revolution. There's so much more. Now, here's one more bit of information that may be of interest. During the war, back in 1779, General George Washington's aides, John Lawrence and Alexander Hamilton, came up with a plan to help free 3,000 African-American men in South Carolina and Georgia in exchange for their military service. And wouldn't you know, these two states said, no way. They rejected this plan because they did not want these men to carry weapons. So these are some unknown facts to some of you. And if you are a history buff, you probably already know some, and that's a good thing. But the bottom line is blacks fought and were needed in the American Revolution. They were instrumental in helping the 13 original colonies win the war with the assistance of Spain and France. The British were defeated, and in 1783, at the signing of the Treaty of Paris, the American Revolution ended and made the United States a free and independent country. It's been my goal to provide you with a bird's eye view from an African American perspective on this aforementioned combat through literary figures such as Phyllis Whitley, some statistics, and some specific figures from the state of South Carolina. Thank you so much for this opportunity to raise awareness of how African Americans took an active role in the path for freedom for all of us.
That was phenomenal. I learned so much from your stories. I want to read that book.
Okay.
It's just amazing, the contribution. Everyone contributed.
Yes.
So it just has to make you so, so, so proud of all of the contributions. And just like most everyone living around here, probably a large majority of our citizens can trace back, although there are no figures for the African American families to go back and trace, but there are probably many, many stories from every family.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for being with us. You've been listening to SC250 Tuesday, bringing you information about Chesterfield County, the PD region, and South Carolina's role in the American Revolution, and brought to you by SC250.